This is the RC10 Worlds car from 1994. This is what Team Associated made after Brian Kinwald won the 1993 IFMAR Off-Road World Championships in the two-wheel drive buggy category. Actually, a bit of a side note, you can now find the 93 IFMAR Worlds video on YouTube. There's one video about a half hour long or so for the four-wheel drive event and another one for the two-wheel drive event. It was rather interesting to note that Kinwald was not necessarily the fastest guy on the track, especially in the last race. He had Masami and I believe Joel Johnson barreling up his ass, but he managed to hold them off for the win. It was a very impressive drive on his part. Anyway, this is the World's car. This is the original body. It's an RCPS Turbo Mirage body, which you can tell by this little scoop here. I found this car on eBay, just like most of the other cars I have. It was on auction, and this is a very rare car, so I decided that I had to have it. So let's just take the body off here, and I'll go through a few things. The body does have a few cracks on it on the backside, but that's not a big deal. This is more like a runner body. I'll get another body later. So the most distinguishing feature between the World's car and prior cars like the Gold Pans and the Team car is that this had a C-stamp chassis. And by C-stamp basically means the standard black aluminum chassis that you would find in later model Team cars with parts of the chassis milled out. Okay? And this is how you can tell between a C-stamp chassis and any other stamped chassis for vintage Associated models. It does turn out that some of the later Team cars also had a C-stamp chassis, but these are most commonly found on the World's car. Okay. The front and rear shock towers are carbon fiber. Although it doesn't look like there's a weave in there, it's a very smooth weave, like on the rear here. It actually is apparently carbon fiber. This was the first RC10 buggy to come with a proper bell crank steering set, although it came with bushings instead of bearings, and these are flanged bushings. The body mount now mounts on the bell crank rather than here where it used to mount. The suspension arms were made, designed slightly differently, especially in the rear. They were reinforced a little more to give some added strength. The original World's car came with white front and rear arms. Later models came with these black arms like what you see here. I believe this car came with 30-degree caster blocks, whereas previous cars came with 25-degree. Aluminum screws all around, Teflon-coated AE dampers, Lunsford titanium turnbuckles. These are aftermarket. The original World's car came with standard steel turnbuckles, so the previous owner installed these afterwards. This battery brace, I believe, is unique to the World's car. Let's see, what else? The rear bulkhead is different between the World's car and the Team car. So if you look at older RC10s, you'll find that the rear bulkhead would have several mounting points sort of at the outside ear portion here, okay? And I actually have my Team car, and I can show you what I mean by that. You see this little matrix here of 9 mounting holes, and on the Team car, the bulkhead also had a mounting hole way on the inside here. And this mounting hole is what factory Team drivers had been using to reduce camber gain and make the suspension a little more smooth. Okay, so the World's car incorporated that into its design. You have this mounting hole right under where the rear body post is, and then the inner 3 holes, top to bottom, on the outside here. So on this bulkhead here, within this matrix towards the right, there's 3 holes, top, middle, bottom. Those holes remain, but the outer 6 are taken out. And then at the top, there's another hole between that outside hole and that inside hole right in the middle. And that just happens to be where this ball stud is mounted. So you get a few more options here for camber gain than you had in prior chassis. The transmission brace for the Worlds car was carbon fiber. This comes with I believe this is a neoprene stealth gasket here for the stealth transmission. This is not original to the chassis. The chassis came with a felt gasket. This neoprene part is an aftermarket part. I happen to have another one of these lying around that I got a while back, so I happen to be familiar with this. What else is unique to this chassis? Not much that I can remember off the top of my head. This chassis is in very good condition, maybe needs a little bit of cleaning. Very small amount of scratching on the other side of the chassis. Let's see, it comes with a Futaba 148 servo. Not a particularly great servo, but that's okay. I'll take this out and put a proper servo in there. Overall, in very good condition. I'm quite happy with it. The differential is nice and smooth. Everything looks tip-top. So this will look very nice next to my team car that I occasionally run in vintage races and even just some standard club races. Maybe I'll take this out and do some running with it. Although I do want to protect the under tray, so you can tell on the bottom of this team car, this thing got quite beaten up from a lot of running. It turns out that Team Blue Groove, who made this Repro RCPS body and wing, they do make an under tray. They make two under trays. One of them runs up to the front right here, and then they make a new tray that runs all the way up to the front bumper. So I would like to get two of those, one for this chassis and one for my RC10T. You can watch the video I made of that. Let's see, what else? Another thing to point out, actually, now that I have both of these out here, are the wheels. So I had made two videos before about running modern rims on a vintage RC10 chassis. Okay? Now, I actually have a few notes to make, having made that second video or after making that. One thing is, for the front wheels, what is commonly done is modern RC10 wheels have a different offset than vintage RC10 wheels. What was done to account for that was the axle, the front axle that goes onto the steering block. You would take the front axle from an RC10 GT, and it has an offset that pushes the wheel further out, and that accounts for the fact that a modern RC10 rim has a mounting point almost all the way out to the edge of the wheel. So that should give you the correct width. But it actually turns out that your front width is a little bit wider than the true width of a vintage RC10. So if I line up, say, the right side there, you can see left side's a little wider. This is probably more to do with the fact that these rims, these front rims, are maybe a little bit wider than your vintage RC10 front rims, and that's probably making up for most of this. So it's a small difference in width here. Now on the back side, okay, there are two ways that you can set up the rear end of the chassis, and I've gone sort of back and forth. One approach is to use the standard rear suspension arms, like these guys right here, or RPM makes rear suspension arms for the vintage RC10s. I have a set of those. I used to have them installed on here. You run those arms with a B4 rear hub carrier and B44 rear CVDs, and then that will work. You may need a few down travel limiters on the shocks to keep the CVDs from popping out, but that will generally work. You can put modern rims on that, but the offset makes the rear quite narrow compared to the front. So to really get the right width in the rear, if you're going to use the standard RC10 arms with the B4 hub carrier, you'll need vintage RC10 rims, which have a deeper offset. I happen to have a few pairs of those, but I wanted to set this up so that I can run modern rims, because I have a lot more modern rims than I do vintage rims. So the way to do modern rims is to get the Dynotech arms, rear arms, okay, and then the RC10 GT rear hub carrier, which has a different offset from the B4. The Dynotech arms are longer than the original RC10 arms, so basically you're making the arm longer and using the GT hubs to pull the axle inward a little bit. Okay, and then that'll give you almost the right offset to run modern rims. So you can mount the modern rims, and the rear end ends up being a little bit narrower than the front. But again, this front is already a little bit on the wide side. And by the way, even though it's a little narrower, this rear is still a little bit wider than the original rear. It's maybe a little bit harder to tell in this case. It's hard to line this up perfectly, but it looks like, okay, maybe they're very similar, very hard to tell, okay? But they're close, they're very close. When I was looking at it more closely, I thought that this would be narrower than this, but they're pretty close. Okay, so if you want to run modern rims, you can do either approach. I happen to have both the Dynatech arms and the RPM arms. So with the Dynatech arms, you do not want to run the B44 rear CVDs. You want to run the B4 rear CVDs because the arm is longer. You need a longer axle to make it into the differential outdrive. Okay. The reason why I ultimately chose to go with the longer arms and the shorter offset hub carriers as opposed to the standard RC10 arms with the B4 hub carriers, because with a longer arm, the wheel will cover a larger radius arc as the suspension compresses, so less camber gain, should be a little smoother than running the standard arms, even with the offset B4 hub carriers. So that's why I'm presently going with this approach. Again, I go back and forth from time to time, so I'm going to go back to this and see how it goes. The first time I tried the Dynatech arms, I was running the stock team car hub carriers with flange bearings and some spacers and stuff, and it destroyed the bearings. But I didn't know that I needed to actually run the RC10 GT rear hub carriers. Okay, so GT hub carriers, you can get those in 0, 1.5, and 3 degree toe-in. You can also get 3 degree toe blocks for the inner mounting point. So there's all kinds of adjustability there for your vintage RC10. So here's the World's car. Very similar specs to my team car. You can look at my team car video. I basically have it at World's car spec with the shock towers and everything else. The only difference is the stamp of the chassis. This is a B stamp chassis. This is C stamp. Same material and everything, just this has these nice grooves in here to save weight. Okay, so very cool car. In time, I will have it in ready as a runner. But of course, I have many other chassis that also need to be runners. For example, this Kyosho Laser, these Schumacher Cats, Tamiya Astute, and a few others that I need to work on. This Yokomo YZ10, I'm going to make that a runner. But for now, you know, I just had to have this. This is a very rare car, bit of a collector's item. And I think that's it for now, so thanks for watching.